Well, I mean, what I love about the Thai market is it's super competitive, with everyone from the GUI, IQI guys, partially operating here through to Fuzwas, to Property Scout and so on. There's so much happening in this market because the fundamental dynamics, I think, support this level of innovation and opportunity creation. We'd now like to go and look at the Indonesian market. So we're going to have Junghans Tasani come and join me on stage, who's the co-founder and CEO of Pashouses in Indonesia. And he's going to talk about real estate transaction opportunities in the Indonesian market.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. And thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak today. Very, very excited to listen to all the great presentations made thus far. I think maybe I can just do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Junghans Tasani, co-founder and CEO of Pashouses. We are a transaction platform in Indonesia focusing on housing transactions. So I think there has been a lot of very, very good background and information provided by Marco earlier about Southeast Asia. I'm actually here to focus a little bit more on Indonesia, which, as Marco has pointed out earlier, accounts for almost half of the population that we have in Southeast Asia. So it's 275 million people, GDP of about 1.4 trillion. It's a G20 country, very, very productive population, and a very significant housing backlog. It's about 12.7 million houses. And if you take that and break down to the demographics, we are really in the midst of a significant demographic boom in Indonesia right now. So most of the people that are looking to buy houses are in their 30s and in their 40s. And what we see is that this is what we call the equivalent of the American dream. We translate that to the Indonesian dream. So an average house buyer at our platform is 33 years old. So at that time frame, you would have gotten settled down. You most probably have a child. And it's at that turning point that you really think much harder about getting into the home ownership journey and actually having your own house. There are no statistical numbers about housing transactions in Indonesia. Marco has kindly pointed out a much larger estimate of housing transactions in Indonesia. We estimated about $16 billion in housing transactions. So if you compare that to the total GDP, it's only just over 1%, and it's obviously growing quite rapidly. I think one important thing to point out is the split between what we see in the new built houses. I'll refer to them as the primary market, and the secondary market, which is used houses. So one key thing about how you understand Indonesia, if anyone has been to Jakarta, is that Greater Jakarta is one of the largest cities in the world. It has a population of 30 million people. And because of that, about 40% of economic activity is centered around that. And because of that, it makes it a lot of urbanization, a lot of development that has happened around Greater Jakarta over the last 20 to 30 years. And there's less and less new land banks that you can be developing on. So that's why used houses, the secondary market, accounts for more than 60% of the market, whereas the new developers, the new houses that are built by the developers are less than 40%. You see that there is also a pretty healthy mortgage growth, so albeit from a very, very small base. So less than 3% of GDP is in mortgage lending in Indonesia, so that's just under $40 billion. It is a significant growth over the last few years because the banks are really going into secured lending, and that is really one of the sectors that is leading banking growth in Indonesia. So you've got about $6 to $7 billion per annum in mortgages. But there is still such a significant amount of room for growth, and the banks are really looking for ways to do that. The banks have actually worked out a pretty good, I would call it a triple win situation, with the real estate developers, with the customers that are buying the houses, and for themselves. So this is an illustration of one of the biggest developers in Indonesia. They sell over 4,000 new houses a year, and I would consider them to be selling pretty quickly. And there are two big reasons for them to be able to do so. One is the price point. They are basically selling the houses at a price range of $70,000 to $200,000. So it's pretty affordable for someone that is entering the middle class, growing their incomes and their careers. The second feature, which is quite interesting in the Indonesian mortgage market for the developers is that there is this concept of a buyback guarantee. So usually in the first few years of buying the house with a mortgage, if there is a default, most of the time the developer has an obligation to buy back the house. So what it effectively has done for the banks is that instead of having to underwrite every single customer by themselves, which they still do theoretically, they actually rely on the developers to provide a backstop financing and a guarantee in the event of default. So it really transitions this whole mortgage lending journey from a B2C to a B2B2C with the developers in between. The banks love this. So if you look at the mortgage book, about 70% of the bank's mortgage book is actually for the new houses, whereas only 30% of the mortgage book is for the used houses segment, which is actually the reverse, almost the reverse of what we see in terms of the housing transactions. And if you look at this, you have got the primary sales just accounting for less than 40% of total transactions, but they account for most of the mortgage lending of the banks. So if you are the bank and you're trying to grow as increasing your secured loan book, and there are really not that many avenues for growth, the secondary market, the used houses market, becomes a really significant opportunity. Before we talk about the opportunity, though, we also need to understand what are the challenges that we see in the used houses market. Marco has touched on this earlier. The value chain of the used houses transactions is really broken in Indonesia. So it takes, on average, more than 12 months for a seller to sell a house. So there are three fundamental issues that we see in this problem. The first is that there is no concept of data transparency. So the government does not publicly disclose the data is not publicly available. The brokerages in Indonesia are pretty fragmented. So if you take the top 3 brokerages combined, they are less than 20% market share. Because of that, you also see a very, very poor quality of brokerages because there's a lot of competition. There is not enough training, certification to enable the brokers to function effectively. And the third, and probably the most interesting part for us, is that the house condition. So a lot of times people talk about selling houses as location, location, location. But as it turns out, if you want to sell a house quickly, the condition of the house also needs to be good. And most of the houses that we find for sale in Indonesia is actually really, really poorly maintained. And because of that, the whole process of getting a buyer, getting somebody to go and visit the house, that actually takes a really, really long time. And when they step into the house and they say that, hey, I don't really like this house. Even if they do like this house, the banks come and appraise the property and they say, well, this property looks like a really, really poor quality property that makes us very, very conservative about giving financing for. So it basically means that even though secondary transactions is such a large opportunity, it is really, really difficult for there to be a seamless transition from a seller looking to sell a house to a buyer being able to get the financing and all the legal administration to be sorted out. This is really where Pashouses comes in. So what we seek to do is really to replicate an ecosystem that has really worked for the primary developers and to replicate it in the secondary market. So there are 3 stakeholders that we really focus on. The first stakeholder is obviously the seller. So the mission of Pashouses is to help sellers to create a much more reliable, convenient, and trustworthy selling experience. So we want to make it far, far easier for a seller to be able to sell more quickly. So we either give them an ability to sell quickly through an iBuyer platform or to actually accept our, what we call a renovation service or a brokerage 2.0, where it is not just about selling the house, doing brokerage for the house, but it's about making the house more sellable. So the houses that we sell on our platform will at least have a degree of renovation and staging. So it essentially creates this perspective that this house is as good as brand new, it's ready to move in. And that really allows us to accelerate the selling process with the buyers. So for the buyers coming onto our platform, they will see that all these houses are as good as new. So they'll step into one of our houses and they'll be asking, well, this looks like a show unit, because I've been to the show units of the real estate developers. Where is the real house? And we say, this is the house. If you want it, you can buy it with the furniture as well. You're ready to move in tomorrow. So from the buyer's perspective, it really transformed the whole experience, where they're used to dealing with brokers that may not provide the best experience. They're used to seeing poor quality houses. They're used to seeing pricing that is really not in line with what they have been seeing otherwise. So what we do is we provide them a much more consistent experience that takes the buyer and give them an end-to-end journey, so that it is not just about doing the transaction, but it's really just from an end-to-end, from getting the house to getting the financing, getting the legal paperwork to be sorted out. The banks play a very, very critical role. Obviously, the banks are very, very happy today to work with us because we are one of the very few aggregators of used houses transactions right now. So we work with over 8 banks. We facilitate different sorts of financing solutions to be able to allow the banks to underwrite a certain type of customer to be able to find the type of quality of the houses that they are more interested and confident in lending towards. So what it means is that there is a better source of truth because we provide a much better quality of houses. We provide the data transparency because we facilitate the whole transaction. So we have our own in-house sales team as well, which, by the way, is also salaried to be able to facilitate a much more consistent selling experience. So when you have more data that's available, when you have a much more reliable buying and selling experience, it creates a lot more trust. And this is what we believe to be the ecosystem, or we call it the virtuous cycle, where you do more and more transactions, you get more and more data, you build up your own reputation, and because of that, more and more buyers and sellers actually see that I'm transacting one of the biggest assets in my whole life. I want to make sure that there is the best platform out there that I can trust, that takes me from an end-to-end journey and not just about facilitating one aspect of the equation. This is an illustration of what we do for the houses. We basically focus first on the quality of the houses. So it's not just about getting a house, selling it as quickly as possible, but first elevating it within 3 weeks to a certain level of quality that helps it to sell faster and at a higher price. It is very important to note that a lot of buyers in the market are investors. So if you are an investor, you probably look at the left-hand side and say, I can fix this house up. But if you are an end user and you see, there's mold in this house, is this going to happen after I buy this house? It looks like the tile is broken. Who has lived here before? The paint is green. There are a lot of thought considerations that makes it very, very difficult for an end user to think about buying a house. And what we essentially do is within a 3 weeks value add, we're able to transform the quality of the house. So the buyer actually pays a premium. They pay more, but they get a better quality. And because of this, what we have done, what we have estimated is that 93% of our buyers actually buy the house to live in it. This is actually one of the data points that is very difficult to attain, and it's actually not surprising because the house that we are selling is actually more expensive than a house that's in a poor condition because we have done a lot of value add on the house. And because of that, if you're an end user, you would only buy our house because you see that you like the house. You've fallen in love with the house, and hence you want to live in it. And for the banks, this really matters. 70% of our buyers actually use a mortgage to buy the house. It is really, really important for the banks to know that our buyers are almost 95% end users, because as an investor, you have double the chance of defaulting of a mortgage loan than you do as an end user. So imagine if you're an end user, if times get tough, you may default on your mortgages, you may default on your car loans. The house is the last thing that you want to default on. So the mortgage default rate as an end user is a lot lower. So the banks really appreciate that. Traditionally, the chance of getting a mortgage rejection for a used house buyer is about 50% in Indonesia. So imagine the type of difference that we're helping the bank, essentially creating the same triple win situation where the bank gets a lot more comfortable in underwriting the house and underwriting the consumer as well, because they know that the quality of the consumer, the intention in buying the house is really to buy to live in it, and this house is one of a good quality. We have quite a few key stakeholders. We see all of them as partners. We actually don't identify with anyone as a competitor. So obviously, we work a lot with online marketplaces like Property Guru, 99.co to distribute our products. We work with the offline real estate agents to help to distribute our houses. The banks, as mentioned, very, very critical partners. Even the developers, and this is where it gets a little bit counterintuitive for some people. The developers always think about, I'm just selling a brand new house. Most of the developers in Indonesia do not really think today about how the house does after it's being sold. But if you want to continue to sell a house in an area that you have been building out at, you want to make sure that the prices in the secondary market do not collapse. So from their perspective, they see us as a platform that helps them to maintain the value of their houses. And if you're able to maintain the value of your houses, it gives them a better chance to be able to sell a house in the primary development. So we actually partner with some of the biggest developers in Indonesia to help facilitate a more liquid secondary market. Technology is a core part of how we deliver the experience. As we have more and more sellers coming to our platform, it allows more and more buyers to come into the platform, and it creates that virtuous cycle. So as the interesting thing about what we do is that we actually do a fair amount of offline verification of the house and of the buyer. So Marco mentioned earlier that when you do a visit, that process is still very difficult to take online. We also make sure that there is a property verification that we do on the house to make sure that the information provided is accurate. That actually gives us really, really good insights into the customers, into the sellers, and into the buyers. And that allows us to build a much better algorithm to be able to improve the matching. So today we have over 200 properties that we list on our platform, and that actually allows the buyers to have a much better variety of choices. We're scaling up the supply on our platform as well, and that actually allows us to provide an even better matching service. We actually consider ourselves as a developer with a limitless land bank because we can be present all across Greater Jakarta, which is a market that we're focusing on. So thank you, and look forward to questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for that presentation. Super interesting about what you're doing. Let's tackle some of these questions. How do you guarantee trust for all deal participants? What would you do in case of an economic crisis? How strong is the economy?
Well, the Indonesian economy is seen as one of the most stable economies over the last 20 years, averaging over 5% economic growth. Trust is actually the most important aspect of it. So, our vision is to build a trusted transaction platform for housing in Indonesia. And that's why for us it's really important to make sure that there is that degree of verification on the buyers, on the sellers of the houses that they have. We actually do an offline verification. We make sure that there is a certain level of quality that is associated with the houses that we sell. We even ensure that there is an after-sales guarantee. So after you buy the house, if there is any significant leaks and damages in the first 3 to 6 months, we'll actually send somebody in to fix the quality of the house.
Okay. Now, how do you guarantee, so we've done that one. Can you disclose a bit more about the different revenue streams, renovation services, mortgages, advertising, commissions, etc.? How does it break down?
Sure. So firstly, there is the renovation service that we provide. So we do it at cost, and we charge a renovation fee on top of the cost. We have the mortgage referral as well. So today we do mortgage referrals with the banks, and we make a mortgage referral fee on that. Obviously, there's the brokerage service that we provide as well. So I would say that these are the three main sources of revenue that we have.
Okay. Now, what is, renovation services are difficult to scale fast. You're not going to find it there. That one's not up to date. Fail fast. What are your thoughts on this as a bottleneck, so renovation services? Because it takes people to go and renovate houses.
It definitely does. It takes on average 3 weeks for us to do. So I would say that our business has a certain level of operational intensity. But what is key to highlight is the degree of complications that you experience. So our renovations on average cost less than $5,000. So we're not building a new floor. We are not basically breaking down walls. We're basically fixing up the house in as quick a manner as possible to make it look almost as good as new aesthetically. So it is difficult to scale, and that's actually one of the barriers to entry for us, because we've actually created that process that enables, really, really efficient onboarding, contractors that we work with. That 3 weeks process is actually monitored in a pretty seamless manner for us right now.
What is the dollar premium on the sale price for every dollar invested in fixing the house? How much profit do you make?
So basically, for us, we charge at cost plus a 20% fee. So that's basically how much we charge it to the seller. So in terms of the speed to selling, the average selling speed in Indonesia for a used house is over 12 months. We're averaging less than 6 months.
Okay. There's a question here that says, how would you describe yourself? Are you a broker, a renovation service offerer, or a platform?
Our vision is to become the trusted transaction platform for houses. So actually, we first look at what are the problems that we see in the space. So actually, if you look at all the services that we are offering, those are the services that you associate with a platform that you can trust when you're looking at selling the house. So imagine this is like there's a whole concept of a home ownership journey. You start from being a buyer. After you own the house, you eventually become a seller at some point in time. So our objective is to make sure that when you're thinking about buying, selling, renovating, refinancing, we become the platform that you seek to, because we give you the end-to-end solution.
Okay. How do you generate seller leads?
It's today anything that allows a seller to come to us. So we do offline outreaches, we do online outreaches. Obviously, we work with agencies as well to bring us seller leads. We actually, the one thing to highlight though is that we always verify the leads by visiting the house. So today it does not look that it's scalable, but when you are able to keep on focusing on the same areas over and over again. And remember, I was mentioning that Greater Jakarta, which is the market we're focusing on, has a huge density. So when there is enough density, it actually allows you to have enough replicability, and basically just repeating, and after a while, you know, once you're in a certain area, when you're with a certain house, you know what to expect.
Okay. You said your agents are in-house and salaried, so they work for you. What about the contractors that fix up the houses for you? Are they external?
They're external. So what we do is we provide, we call it the construction management. So the construction management is done in-house, but we do not employ the contractors, the workers directly.
Okay. What's your revenue per home, and how does this model scale?
So I think one interesting aspect about the type of houses that we're focusing on is that the check size is actually between $40,000 and about $200,000. So it's a kind of middle-sized houses, and Indonesia has really one of the burgeoning, middle-class populations that you can find in the region. And because of that, what we see is that there is actually a lot of houses, a lot of sellers, a lot of buyers. So there's actually a lot of repeatability. And because of that, from our average check size today is about $70,000.
Okay. So that's, sorry, $70,000 profit?
No, $70,000 is the average check size of a house that's being transacted.
Okay. And what's your profit on that?
So our unit margins today are about 4 to 5%.
Okay. So this is a game of massive scale.
Yes. I would say that it is about taking control of the whole transaction journey. So if you look at what are the horizontals that you can be looking at, we do staging for the houses as well. So if someone buys a house with the furniture, they will be able to do that. Financing is actually one of the big things in Indonesia, because we see that we are actually able to bring a significant amount of home buyers into the banks. So how can we monetize that better and get actually more economies of scale?
Okay. And when you're operating at scale, what sort of margins you're looking at? 20%, 30%? Do you think you can get to that level of scale?
I'm sorry. Actually, our take rate is about 20% on average. So based on that 20%, our EBITDA, or rather our profit margin is about 20%. Sorry, I'm blanking out here. It's about 25% on that. So I'm talking about 4 to 5% because I'm referring to the unit margins on the GMV.
Okay, I've got that. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
I like
you.
what you're trying to do. It's a very different approach, and good luck with growing the business.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.